Rheneas and the Dinosaur. Rheneas and Skarloey are the best of friends. They love working together. And they enjoy shunting trucks. They biff them and they bash them all day long. That summer, some men from the Sodor Museum had found some very old bones. When they put the bones together, they made the skeleton of a dinosaur. That morning, a photographer arrived on the island to photograph the dinosaur. Thomas was to take him to the transfer yards. At the transfer yards, Mr. Percival was talking to his engines. "The dinosaur will soon be ready to go to the Sodor Museum," Mr. Percival said. "I will need 2 very careful engines to collect it." Rheneas and Skarloey were very excited. "We can be really careful," puffed Rheneas. "Watch." Rheneas shunted some trucks gently together. But Skarloey was too excited to be careful. The thin controller was cross. "Rheneas and Skarloey, you are not careful engines," Mr. Percival said. "I will have to choose 2 other engines to collect the dinosaur." "But I can be careful," said Rheneas. "Let me try again, please." "Very well," Mr. Percival said, "but this is your last chance." "Thank you, sir," said Rheneas happily. Skarloey was sad. "I'm sorry I biffed the trucks," he whistled quietly, "but I'm sure we could take the dinosaur together." "No," said Rheneas. "I'll show Mr. Percival I can do it on my own." And he steamed away. Later, Rheneas had to take some coal to the station houses. The trucks were very heavy for him on his own. His pistons pounded and his axles ached. But Rheneas kept going. "Must take the dinosaur, must take the dinosaur," he puffed. Later at the transfer yards, Mr. Percival came to see Rheneas. "Rheneas, you have worked very hard today," said Mr. Percival kindly, "and pulled very heavy trucks. Very carefully on your own." This made Rheneas very proud. "So I have decided you can collect the dinosaur," Mr. Percival added. "But are you sure you can do it on your own?" "Yes, sir, I'm sure," whistled Rheneas. He was very happy. "And Skarloey," called Mr. Percival, "you will collect empty trucks from the timber yards." "Yes, sir," peeped Skarloey sadly. He watched Rheneas race quickly away to collect the dinosaur. Rheneas chuffed cheerfully through the mountains. But when Rheneas arrived to collect the dinosaur, he was surprised. The dinosaur was very, very big. But Rheneas was sure he was strong enough to pull it. He coupled up to the flatbed and pulled with all his puff. He started to puff his way back to the yards. Rheneas blew his whistle as he puffed through Middle Station. Everyone thought the dinosaur skeleton was wonderful, and they all gave Rheneas a big cheer. Rheneas was very proud. Rheneas was puffing slowly up a hill, but the flatbed was too heavy. His puff was going, and his pistons could hardly pump. Rheneas puffed slower and slower. Then he rolled back down the hill. He could go no further. "Oh, no," he moaned. I'll never get the dinosaur to the transfer yards now. Rheneas felt terrible. Then he remembered his friend. I wish Skarloey was here to help me, he sighed. Skarloey was still on his way to collect trucks from the timber yards. As he came round a bend in the line, he was very surprised to see a dinosaur blocking the track. Out of my way, Skarloey tooted loudly. Rheneas heard Skarloey. Skarloey, he cried, I need your help. The dinosaur is too heavy for me. I can't pull it on my own. Skarloey was still upset with Rheneas. He didn't want to help. I was silly to think I could pull this on my own, puffed Rheneas sadly. It needs 2 engines, and I need you. From now on, I'll always want us to work together. That made Skarloey feel much better, and he buffered up to the flatbed to help his friend. Together, they pushed the dinosaur safely up the hill and all the way back to the yards. Rheneas and Skarloey puffed happily into the transfer yards, just as Thomas arrived with the photographer. Rheneas and Skarloey had their picture taken with the dinosaur. They were delighted. They were both pleased to be friends again, and they both agreed that working with your friend is the best job of all. Flower Power. It was Halloween night on the Island of Sodor. The moon shone brightly and the stars twinkled in the night sky. The children's Halloween party was over, but while the children slept, all the engines were kept very busy. Thomas was alone at Tidmouth Sheds when the Fat Controller arrived. He was still in his Halloween costume. You are to collect flour from the mill and take it to the bakery, he boomed. You must work with Diesel. The island needs its morning toast, and Lady Hatt and I need our crumpets, he added sternly. So I'll have no mishaps tonight. Thomas didn't want to work with Diesel, but he wanted to be really useful. When Thomas arrived at Brendan, he couldn't see Diesel at all. Diesel was up to his old tricks. He rolled up behind Thomas and went, boo! Trust the silly old steamy to be scaredy on Halloween, Diesel sneered. I'm not a scaredy engine, said Thomas firmly. We'll see, oiled Diesel. Thomas and Diesel headed for the flour. Diesel teased Thomas with every click and every clack. When they arrived at the woods, Diesel cried, It's the haunted forest! And he called out, Woo, Thomas! in a spooky voice. Stop it, said Thomas crossly. But the breeze blew, and the branches creaked. Diesel's teasing made it seem spooky indeed. Then they came to the abandoned mine. The buildings were deserted, but they could hear a banging noise. What was that? Cried Thomas. Sounds like the ghost engine looking for a steamy to scare. Well, I'm not scared, said Thomas. But he wished he felt as brave as he sounded. Thomas and Diesel had to stop at a red signal. It was next to a twisty old tree. The wind whistled, and Thomas heard a strange cry. Suddenly, Thomas felt something touch his tender. "Look out!" cried Diesel. "The ghost engine is after your funnel." "Cinders and ashes," gasped Thomas, and he let out a frightened peep. "Scare the engine," Diesel teased. Thomas was very cross with Diesel. He wanted to pay him back for all his teasing. Thomas and Diesel arrived at the flour mill. Thomas rolled up to collect the flour. Then Thomas had an idea. "We'll see who's a scaredy engine," he puffed. Thomas biffed the trucks out of the way and rolled under the chute himself. When Thomas puffed out the other side, he was covered from dome to buffer in pure white flour. "Ooh!" he said spookily. "It's the ghost engine," cried Diesel. "It's come to get me." "Stop," cried Thomas. "It's just me." But Diesel was nowhere to be seen. After Diesel was gone, the mill seemed very quiet. But there was still work to do. "The island needs its bread," thought Thomas, "and the fat controller needs his crumpets." Thomas shunted all the trucks into one long line, and he set off for the bakery all alone. As Thomas arrived at the twisty tree, he wished he could go faster. But it was a very long train, and he had to go slowly. Because he was going so slowly, Thomas could see that the tree wasn't spooky at all. "It was just a tree," he gasped, "and the strange cry was an owl." Thomas was relieved. Thomas chugged towards the abandoned mine. He could still hear the spooky banging. He looked to his left and then to his right, and he saw what was making the noise. "It's just an old door," he gasped. "The wind is making it crash." Finally, Thomas reached the old woods. The breeze still blew, and the branches creaked. Thomas took a big, brave puff. But without Diesel's teasing, Thomas could see the haunted forest was actually Henry's favourite forest. "It's not scary at all," said Thomas. Thomas arrived at the bakery. He was tired but happy. "It's the ghost engine, sir," Diesel told the fat controller, "and it's come to get me." "It's not a ghost engine," boomed the fat controller. "That's Thomas. He's a really useful engine." "Thomas, you have done a splendid job," the fat controller said. "You deserve a special washdown." "Thank you, sir," puffed Thomas proudly. And while the fat controller waited for the first batch of crumpets, Thomas looked forward to telling his friends his Diesel Halloween story. Henry and the Flagpole. All the engines on the island of Sodor were very excited. There was to be a great banquet at the Scottish castle. Henry loved going to the Scottish castle because on the way he puffed past his favourite tree. The tall pine tree towered above the rest of the forest. Henry always stopped to look at it. Seeing the tall pine tree standing tall and proud made Henry very happy. Henry arrived at the Scottish castle. The fat controller was waiting for him. "The castle's flagpole is old and about to break," he said. "I need you to collect a new flagpole from the docks in time for the banquet." "Yes, sir," puffed Henry. When Henry puffed into the docks, he couldn't see the tall flagpole anywhere. He looked around for something tall. He looked above the coal trucks, but there was nothing tall there. He looked at an old ship. It had a tall mast. Then Henry saw Cranky. Cranky was very tall. But Henry didn't see the flagpole. It was on the flatbed in front of him. It rolled onto the track.
Sorry, matey,
called Salty. I didn't expect to see the flagpole down there, puffed Henry.
It's not tall when you lay it down, matey,
said Salty. Henry felt very silly. Soon, the Fat Controller arrived.
This is a disaster, he boomed. The Scottish castle will not look the same without its flagpole.
Henry was very sad. It was all his fault.
Maybe seeing the tall pine tree will cheer me up,
Henry huffed. But nothing could make Henry feel better.
I wish I hadn't broken the flagpole,
Henry sighed to Toby. They could make a new flagpole out of that tall tree, Toby puffed. Henry looked up at the tall pine tree. He didn't want it to be made into a flagpole. The next morning, Henry had to take some workmen to the forest. But the workmen were carrying saws and axes.
Oh no,
moaned Henry.
They must be going to cut down the tall pine tree.
Henry puffed through the countryside.
Must save the tree! Must save the tree!
He puffed. Then Henry had an idea. He didn't take the workmen to the forest. He went to look for a new flagpole. Henry saw some children waving flags, but those flags were much too tiny to have flagpoles. There was a flagpole holding up a windsock at the airfield, but that flagpole was much too short. There was a tall flagpole on the beach, but it wasn't tall enough.
Bother!
Wheezed Henry sadly.
None of the flagpoles is as tall as the pine tree. Now I'll never save it.
That evening, the Fat Controller came to see Henry at the sheds.
Henry, those workmen had a very important job to do. You have caused confusion and delay, the Fat Controller said sternly. Tomorrow, you will collect coal and Edward will take the workmen to the forest.
The next day, Henry was collecting the coal when Thomas arrived.
I can't find another flagpole,
moaned Henry.
I've looked everywhere.
Sometimes the thing you want is somewhere you wouldn't think to look, puffed Thomas, and he steamed away. So Henry set off to go where he wouldn't think to look. But he couldn't see a flagpole in the canfield. Then Henry looked in the orchard. But only Trevor was there. Hello, Henry.
You're very nice, Trevor, puffed Henry, but you wouldn't make a very good flagpole.
Henry puffed sadly into the docks. Holidaymakers were taking pictures of the old ship. Henry looked up at the tall mast.
What about the ship's mast?
asked Henry.
It's to be chopped up and used for firewood, me hearty,
said Salty.
But it'll be perfect for the castle flagpole,
Henry chuffed.
Then you'd best take it quickly, matey,
said Salty. Cranky soon lowered the mast onto the flatbed. And Henry raced off to the forest. He had to get to the tree before they cut it down. When Henry pulled into the forest, the tall pine tree was still there, and so was the Fat Controller.
Please don't cut down the tall pine tree, sir,
chuffed Henry.
I think this ship's mast would make a very good flagpole. I would never cut the tall pine tree down, said the Fat Controller. The workmen are only here to collect some firewood. We always have a roaring fire at the Scottish Castle banquet.
Henry was so happy it made his axles tingle. That night, the flag was hoisted on the old ship's mast. It looked wonderful. Henry thought it was the nicest thing he had ever seen, except for the tall pine tree. Thomas and the new engine. The engines on the island of Sodor keep very busy. There are always lots of jobs to do. One morning, the Fat Controller came to Tidmouth's sheds.
A new engine has arrived on the island,
he announced.
His name is Neville. You must all make him feel welcome. A happy engine is a useful engine.
Later, Thomas was stopped at a signal. The signalman called down to Thomas. The bridge ahead is unsafe. Thomas, you are to collect a piece of ironwork so the bridge can be repaired. Yes, sir, huffed Thomas. At the yards, Harry and Bert were with Neville, the new engine. Neville was a steamy, but he had a square body like a diesel. Neville was backing up towards some trucks.
Nearly there,
said Harry cheekily.
Nearly there,
said Bert naughtily. Then there was trouble.
Watch where you're going, clumsy wheels,
Harry and Bert laughed. Neville looked sad.
It's not our fault you're a silly steamy,
oiled Bert, and they laughed even harder. Thomas arrived at the yards. He could see Harry and Bert laughing with Neville. That must be the new engine, he thought. He must be friends with the diesels. Thomas arrived at Knapford Station.
Have you seen the new engine yet?
asked James. Yes, said Thomas, but we'd better be careful. I saw him at the yards with Harry and Bert. They were laughing together. James was shocked. A steamy friendly with diesels. As Thomas left, Edward pulled in.
Have you heard about the new engine?
Snorted James, and he started to tell Edward all about Neville. Later, Edward was taking on water. He was talking to Percy. That new steamy Neville is best friends with the diesels, Edward puffed. He doesn't want to be with steamies at all.
How do you know?
Peeped Percy. James told me and Thomas told him, whistled Edward. Then later, Percy met Emily at a red signal.
Don't go near Neville, the new engine, he told her. The diesels have told him to biff into steamies. Edward told me, James told Edward, and they all heard it from Thomas.
When Thomas arrived at Abbey Station, the Fat Controller was there.
Thomas, you must warn all engines not to cross the bridge until it is repaired,
he boomed. Thomas felt proud. It was a very useful job. Just then, he heard a whistle. Someone was coming. Thomas had to warn them. It was Neville, pulling Annie and Clarabel. Thomas was shocked. Annie and Clarabel were his carriages. Hello, puffed Neville cheerfully. I'm not talking to you, Thomas huffed crossly. Neville didn't know what he had done. Then Emily pulled in next to Neville. Hello, said Neville happily. Emily let out a wheesh of steam.
It's no use trying to make friends with me. I know you're going to biff into all the steamies, just like Harry and Bert told you to.
Thomas was surprised, but the station master blew his whistle, and Neville puffed sadly away.
Where did you hear that Neville is going to biff into all the steamies? Thomas asked Emily. Don't you know? Emily whistled. Percy told me, Edward told Percy, James told Edward, and you told James, huffed Emily. But I only said to James that I'd seen Neville with Harry and Bert.
Then Toby arrived.
Have you heard about Neville, the new engine?
He puffed.
Henry saw Harry and Bert be horrible to him at the yards.
Emily was shocked. Thomas couldn't believe it.
Neville wasn't friends with the Diesels after all. Where was Neville going? Emily tooted.
Cinders and ashes, cried Thomas. Neville's heading for the broken bridge. I must stop him.
Neville was speeding through the countryside as fast as he could. Suddenly, Neville saw a barrier on the track. He slammed on his brakes,
but it was too late. Neville was in terrible trouble. He was on the broken end of the bridge. Thomas knew it was all his fault. Suddenly he had an idea. Thomas steamed slowly and carefully onto the bridge. He gently bumped Clarabel and was coupled up. Thomas was very scared. Slowly and steadily he began to pull Neville back from the edge. The bridge made a creaking noise. Thomas knew he must hurry. He pulled as hard as he could, and with one big puff, he pulled Neville's wheels off the bridge. Thomas had done it. He had saved Neville and Annie and Clarabel.
Thank you, whistled Neville. I should have warned you, puffed Thomas, but I was too busy believing silly stories. I thought you didn't like steamies, but now I know I was wrong.
Thomas gave Neville a long, friendly toot.
Neville was very happy. At last he knew he had a good friend in Thomas.
Emily knows best. The island of Sodor has many beautiful sights. There are green fields and hills, and many beautiful castles. The engines of Sodor love to visit them all. One day, Emily was dropping visitors at the ruined castle. Once upon a time, a queen had lived there.
Queens are in charge and tell everybody what to do. I'd like to be a queen, thought Emily. Down the hill from the castle, Toby and Percy arrived. They were to shunt trucks. Percy had never worked there before.
Look at the castle, peeped Percy excitedly. I wonder who lived there.
A king and a queen, said Toby. They ruled the island and told everyone what to do. Percy stared at the castle. He was dreaming of kings and queens. Percy, called Toby, come along, we've got a lot to do today. Waiting for passengers is boring, huffed Emily. Then she remembered that Toby and Percy were working near the castle. It would be much more fun to visit them, she said. Toby and Percy were waiting to be coupled up when Emily chuffed in. She was very excited about the castle. Percy, she whistled, I've had an idea. Let's play a game. Percy looked pleased. I'll be the Queen and I'll tell you what to do today, she said. It'll be fun.
Percy liked the idea of having fun, but Toby thought Emily's idea was silly.
You have to be clever to be a queen, he said wisely, and know the right thing to do. I always know what to do, huffed Emily.
Toby laughed. That made Emily cross.
I'll show Toby that Queen Emily knows best, she wished. Toby was now coupled up to his trucks.
Percy thought his trucks looked troublesome.
Don't worry, said Toby. I'll be back soon. If you can't manage the trucks, wait for me and I'll tell you what to do. And Toby steamed slowly away. The troublesome trucks started to moan and groan. They clattered and chattered. Percy knew they were going to be trouble.
Emily had been watching Percy.
If I want to be a queen, I must tell Percy what to do, she thought, because I know best.
Percy was shunting his trucks as hard as he could, but they wouldn't move. They were being very difficult. Emily chuffed to a halt.
Percy, she whistled loudly, I am queen today. I will tell you what to do.
Percy was worried. Toby usually knew best.
Take these trucks along my track, said Emily. It's faster and the trucks won't complain. Toby will be pleased when he sees how quick you are.
Percy wanted Toby to be pleased.
I'll do as you say, Queen Emily, he tooted.
Emily was pleased with herself. She watched as Percy blew a big whoosh of steam. Percy puffed and he chuffed, and the troublesome trucks sped off. Emily let out a whoosh of steam. She did know best. But suddenly there was a terrible noise. As the dust cleared, Emily saw what had happened. The trucks had run into Mavis, who was waiting on the track. Luckily, no one was hurt, but her load of stone had spilled all over the lines, and one of the trucks had come off the rails, knocking over a telephone pole.
Percy, cried Mavis, you're not supposed to be on this track.
Emily was shocked. Then there was another loud crash. It was Toby. His wheels had struck the telephone pole and he was derailed. Emily knew this was all her fault, but she didn't know what to do. The telephone line was down, so no one could call for help. Mavis couldn't move. She was stuck amongst the trucks. And Percy couldn't move either.
I'm sorry, Toby, cried Emily. I can't be a queen. I don't know what to do. I don't know best.
Toby wheeshed out a great cloud of steam.
I know what to do, he cried. Emily, you must go and get help.
Emily knew Toby was right. She steamed off as fast as she could. Emily whooshed to a halt at Maithwaite Station. She told the station manager what had happened. Quickly, he phoned for help. Soon Toby had been lifted back up onto the rails. He wasn't hurt, but his cowcatchers would need to be repaired. Emily chuffed into the shunting yards. The Fat Controller was very cross. "Emily," he boomed, "you have caused confusion and delay. Luckily, Toby knew what to do," he added sternly.
I'm sorry, Emily said. Knowing the right thing to do isn't as easy as I thought, she chuffed. In future, I'll leave that job to a king or a queen or to Toby.